Welcome to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. It is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, where we talk about pyramids, gods, devils, nephis, Anunnaki, Inky, fucking Enlil, giants, aliens, pyramids, huge rocks, floods, glaciers, pyramids, dreams, spirits, angels, demons, pyramids, and of course, snakes. That's right. I think, I know we had a pre-show discussion about all this stuff we're going to talk about, and I'm just going to completely change everything right now.
Sweet.
And I want to bring up, because this is kind of happening right now, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but the stuff with the various, the various sports stars doing various protests, okay, that situation,
Kneelers.
the kneelers, that situation has made me, I've never really been into sports. I mean, watching sports or being fans of sports. I like to play them before the accident or whatever, but I'm not really. I don't sit down and watch football on TV. I just don't. I've never been interested.
Yeah.
And I never really understood the there's something that happens with people. Like I was living in San Antonio when the Spurs were just kicking ass, right?
Yeah.
And I'm at Starbucks in line to get a coffee, and everyone's fucking talking about the Spurs, and I'm just like, this basketball, who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
You know? And they're like, man, they're fucking Spurs. What do you think about the Spurs? I'm like, I don't think about them at all.
I don't think about the Spurs.
Yeah. But there was this thing, it was it brought the community together somehow. Everyone was like, yeah, this is fucking our team, right? So the other day I'm listening to the news about what's happening and about how these various players on these teams are trying to maintain team unity, team spirit, team togetherness or whatever, while at the same time sort of not necessarily disowning, but kind of
stepping outside
of the nation,
yeah.
Okay, of the nation itself. So this made me think of,
but they don't.
This made me think of the. The Sumerian, for a long time, the Sumerian culture, the Assyria, Babylon, they were city-states, dude.
Yeah.
You had a city, and that was the country.
Yeah.
That there was outlying areas that were farms and shit, but once you got to another city, that was a different country. Okay?
Yeah.
And I was started to think of this. It started to make sense to me what was happening, because the Greek city-states, they had their own, think of how they waged war. Sometimes they make huge alliances with each other, and they would all go fight Troy, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times it was just Sparta is attacking Athens or whatever, okay? So it's they have their own, they were called hoplites. Basically, there were various people in the city who kind of were just good at warfare.
Yeah.
The kind that they did then with the short sword, the huge shield. So they would actually go and get their own equipment, okay? So the Greek phalanx that would be formed, all the guys in the wedge with the shields, and they're holding them up, and they would interlock the shields together, and then that was the city's team. Yeah. And they would go out on the battlefield and face each other, this team from this city and this team from this city. And sometimes they would settle the whole thing with just their two champions fighting. And the reason they could do that is because it was more sports-like than you see what I'm saying?
Right,
so I'm
rules of engagement, all that kind of stuff.
It started to make me understand not understand, but it started to make me see these teams in these cities now as kind of that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you first brought it up, is it's war. Really.
Right. We're when the Dallas Cowboys go to play the New England Patriots, it's just like Sparta attacking Greece or Athens or whatever, except that we've kind of civilized it a little bit. Nobody dies. Well, sometimes people die, but the point is that it's the same deal. Everyone in the city, people in the city of where the team is from is fuck yeah, this is our team, right? Just if the guys were going off to fight war, you'd be like, fuck yeah, and everybody would know the name of the champion, who could kick everybody's ass, and they would be, they would. That started to make sense to me.
Yeah, I see.
That this kind of thing, so it took this weird thing that the players are doing right now for me to see this, or whatever. And so like that was the starting point for this. So like aside from that, the political aspects of that don't matter. The point is I started to see these various sports teams, basketball, but mostly football. Like football is really a lot more aggressive than any other sport.
Yeah.
Like they really get out there
Hockey's
and they
gonna
fucking run into each other. Yeah. What?
Hockey's going to get mad at you for saying that.
Okay. Hockey's really fucking aggressive too.
But you got
to have ice. And like, I mean, yeah, now we can make artificial ice, but they do it inside and, you know, come on. Like a football game can happen in a street. You know what I mean? Like technically you could have it anywhere as long as like, you know, you throw down some markers for the rules or whatever, but a hockey you can't.
Hey, rollerblades?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like football is more.
It's also like just bigger for whatever reason. So it's more of a national pastime.
Yeah,
right?
For us, yeah.
Yeah. So like hockey is like I don't know, it's like lacrosse, you know, that's also really aggressive. I mean, people fucking die playing that shit.
Yeah.
But like with football, it's just like you can see, I just started to see like even the way they line up, it's like the two phalanxes. They're all fucking lined up and they're facing each other and shit, and they just, you know, they just run. It's like straight up like old school warfare. They just run into each other and like, and there's all this melee, except that it's civilized in the sense that nobody's swinging swords and nobody's bleeding and all that shit, right? But so I don't know, that fascinated me because I've never understood the whole getting behind the sports team and just really being all about it. But then this thing that's happening made me see it that way, and I'm like, oh, okay. So then I started to wonder, like, who did this? Like, whose idea? Somebody looking in the past and saying, like, we need this. Like, all these little cities across this nation need to have their own cohesiveness, something local to root for, and we'll pit them against other cities, even though we're all as a nation together. Like if anybody, you know, we're all fighting each other. Like, yeah, fucking Pittsburgh is like kicking New York's ass or whatever. But as soon as somebody else, like somebody from outside the nation attacks us, we're all turn to look at them and like, fuck you, and then we all attack them, right? So you have this like competition within that's safe for the most part, right? But then like it also it results in a sort of national cohesiveness that like we can skirmish with each other and we can be like, you know, fuck you and your sports team or whatever, but we're all this, you know, we're all participating in this thing together, and that like strengthens the bonds. So, you know, so what's happening right now seems to be for the purpose of fraying those bonds. But I'm just saying, like, that just to me that was a fascinating insight because I've never understood, like, yeah, fuck yeah, Spurs. I'm just like, whatever, dude. Yeah. But now maybe like when, you know, I'll see them as like in the light of the ancient warriors, like, yeah. If those were dudes in like hoplite uniforms that had bought all that shit themselves and they were going out there to like attack Athens, I would be like, fuck yeah, go kick their asses. You know, and you know the names of all of them or whatever. And also like, it's kind of different now, but people were saying that like back in the day, like the Pittsburgh Steelers or whatever, back in the day, maybe in the 50s, 60s or whatever, the people on the team were actually from Pittsburgh. Like now there's trading and, you know, the teams purchase players from anywhere.
The league, yeah.
Yeah. But back in the day, it was like people were like, those dudes are from Pittsburgh.
Right.
And so it's Pittsburghians going out to attack like the New Yorkians or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's like it's not like that anymore, but it started out that way, and that makes me wonder whose idea was this? Did they make a connection to this ancient shit that the basic element of a human civilization is the city state, and it functions really well. I mean, the Sumerians had a civilization that lasted for thousands of years, and they had multiple cities that they considered to be Sumerian, but each one was its own self-contained entity. You know, they had Ur and Eridu and Kesh and all that stuff, but they were city states, and each one had its customs and everything like that. And they would, you know, they'd be like, yeah, fuck you, Ur's way better, like that. Even though they were all considered themselves to be Sumerians. And I wondered if something like that was going on here with the sports teams.
So like so in medieval times you have, you know, the tournaments that they would do with and they'd put on all the gear that they would wear and fight with in actual war, but they would like sort of play at it, you know.
Yeah, I mean you could still die.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was very dangerous, but nobody was trying to kill the other guy.
Right. They did this like order. They sort of set up situations that were skill sets that you needed for war.
Yeah.
And then they would pit people against each other that were all really from the same place on the same side.
Right.
And it would, there'd be fans and shit. And then like the gladiators and stuff. I know a lot of those were like slave. They were forced into it, but.
Well, you had the slaves that had to go out and fight the badass gladiator guy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know?
But then the Olympics was kind of the same. Started out in the same way, right? It was warfare that they were.
Right, throwing spears, throwing enormous balls of lead.
Yeah, it's like, so, nowadays, not only do we have these sports teams, but we have, like laser tag and shit.
Yeah.
Paintball.
Right. Like, I'm gonna kill your ass. Yeah, but not really.
Right.
But I'm gonna shoot you. But, not really.
So it's like what we do for war is also fun when you don't have to die doing it.
Yeah, and you're not killing other people doing it too. Yeah. It's a game when it's not deadly.
Yeah.
But it is essentially warfare. Just
right,
it's
warfare.
Civilized, right?
Right.
And so I was thinking about the Mayan ball courts. Like, is this what that was? Like there's something about this. Like, find the most athletic people in your little city state or your civilization, and put them together as a team, and then have them represent everyone, all the fat people and all the people that can't do that kind of shit. They have other skills in that civilization. Like, the fat people are the merchants that like make the economy keep going, shit, whatever. But you have this like athletically badass elite people who like you set out to, in a civilized way, attack other people, Right.
There's also the idea that someone at some point may have realized that like, well, like you have all these warriors, right? They're battle hardened. Yeah. Warriors, they're going out and they're fighting and doing all this shit, and they've killed shitloads of people. And they're fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And then they get back and the war is over.
Yeah, and they're like,
yeah. And it's like there's the idea that some people, they want that.
Yeah.
They need
the conflict. Yeah.
Right. So somebody maybe set up a situation where those people can be sort of pacified. Like you're really good at that shit, so we'll set it up in a way where you can do it and it'll be entertainment.
Right. Or even if you come back from a war and you can't athletically be one of these guys, you can still sort of like vicariously experience the sort of conflict, right? By watching it.
Yeah. I was talking about the sort of more of the origin where it's really like, the melee was you putting on a suit of armor and taking a dull sword out there and kicking people's asses.
Yeah, I'm saying like it may work the same now as like, so a veteran comes back from a war, and then he can and then he gets all into the sports and he watches the football and like that sort of vicariously, like satisfies his need for conflict or whatever.
Right. So that's what I was suggesting, is that it's also a way to sort of
pacify
that aggressive nature,
to civilize it. Yeah.
Yeah.
To shift it to mostly non-deadly endeavors.
Right, but I think what you were mainly getting at was the whole team effort idea, where you're on, it's your city, you're on their side, the team from your city, and like what's happening right now that made you realize this is that there are these people that are supposed to be representing your city from where you're from, and that whole sort of almost like a patriotic type of thing for your local area.
It is patriotic.
And they're stepping out from the team and doing something that draws attention to themselves.
Yeah. There's
whatever they think, and you're like, what? That's not what I came here for.
There's that aspect of it. And then there's also the aspect that like that the thing that they're doing is saying that they don't want to be part of the overall team of the nation. That they don't like it,
But they're claiming that's not what they're doing.
I know, but that's totally what they're doing.
Well, yeah.
I mean, like, if they weren't doing that, why are they doing it during the anthem and stuff? It's like, you could do it at a different time.
No, Russ. That's what you do. When you're mad about something, you protested during the anthem.
Brett's saying that there's also the thing about how when a person moves to another city, they stay a fan of the home team. Which is true. It's not, and it may not necessarily be the home team. It's like wherever the person
feels like they're from.
Yeah, or even like wherever because like we've got a friend who like is all about the New England Patriots. He's never been there. He just fucking loves the Patriots, right? It's like you. I think that it's not necessarily where you're from. Sometimes it's just like when you first get initiated into it and you feel that sense of like this is badass. It's like whatever that team is.
Yeah.
This is why like people will stick with like teams that have decades long losing streaks. They'll stay with them.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll be like, yeah, they lost again, like figured, but eventually there's this enormous winning streak, and they're just like, fuck yeah, and they've been waiting for 20 fucking years for it to happen, you know? Like Dad with Miami.
Yeah.
You know, like there's just like for years they lost all the time, and he was just like, yeah, you know. But then there was a couple of years where they were kicking fucking ass.
After global warming, the hurricanes started just kicking ass.
That's right. That's right.
Keep driving that SUV. My football team's winning.
That's right. Hurricanes are kicking some ass. And saving the Dolphins.
Yeah.
Gotta save the Dolphins. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up, that like it was kind of a weird insight. Maybe. I'm not sure if it's an actual insight. It just made me think of that, like the whole city-state setup.
That's funny, right? When you first were describing the whole fandom of football, I was just thinking, it's war.
Yeah.
Like, really, when you get down to it, we love war.
Right.
And so we need this civilized, as you say, aspect of it to, you know, that way we're not actually like
killing each other,
killing people.
Right. I think of business is the same thing. Business is a civilized version of plunder, right? Because like there's rules that are set up so that like we're not killing anybody, but it's the same, like, I mean, cutthroat competition, right? You go out there and like you're now wearing a 3-piece suit with a tie or whatever instead of a full suit of armor, but you're out there to kick everyone's fucking ass, right? And take all their shit. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's ordered in such a way that it, instead of plunder, it's actually like a growth.
Well, yeah, because the way the rules are set up is the best way to plunder is to like provide something that everybody fucking wants.
Right.
Right. And then you get all their plunder, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's genius in this, like Adam Smith, who talked about this, like the free market system or whatever. He had a low opinion of capitalists or whatever, right? Of merchants, but a high opinion of the system around them, like the thing he called the hidden hand, right? That everybody working for their own interest is also for the interest of everybody, as you know, like, because if you're trying to increase your standard of living, when the best way to increase your standard of living is not to like build up a big army and go attack people, but to make something that everybody fucking wants.
Right. So the invisible hand actually increases everyone's standard of living.
Right, because like you want to be rich as fuck, and the best way to do that is to make something that everybody wants and then sell it as cheaply as possible to as many people as possible, right? That's the best way to become wealthy, despite what some people say. Yeah. And so like that results in an increased standard of living of everyone.
Yeah.
Because by following your own self-interest, you are serving the greater good by making something that everybody fucking wants.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of thing is fascinating, like taking some kind of aspect of human nature that is that like if left alone is kind of deadly and self-defeating, and just like with a little bitty tweak, you make it like massively productive.
Right. There's like the other thing I was thinking of is music. Like at so many concerts that I've been to, there's like mosh pits, right? And
yeah.
You go and get in them, and you're just like, yeah, dude, freaking. You know, smashing into people, and it's like you might get your ass knocked in the dirt.
Yeah.
But then somebody will help you up. You know,
yeah.
It's like, yeah, get back, bam, knock them in the dirt. So there's this badass feeling involved with just kicking ass.
Yeah.
Like for whatever reason, like we have this.
Yeah, it's a free for all.
Part of our nature is we just want to kick fucking ass.
That's right.
And so in a civilized society, and I would say mostly men have this, that like physically to just like kick ass.
Yeah.
In a civilized society, that is that energy and that desire needs to be redirected to something more ordered.
Right. Less destructive. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Less ultimately destructive. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Brett's saying in the business world, what you wear is important. Also, like what kind of suit you wear can totally impact the influence on your adversary, the person. Yeah, that's right. So like instead of showing up with like crazy, like woad symbols all over your face and like huge horns on your helmet, You just have like this badass fucking pinstripe, you know? And people are like, oh shit.
That guy kicks ass.
That guy fucking kicks ass. Look at his Rolex, man. Fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the same symbols. They've just been shifted. You know? I'm just fascinated with the fact that it's like you take something that would be otherwise destructive. The desire to plunder, right? I want to be rich, right? Like I want fucking stuff. So you take that, like which for thousands of years made people go out and steal people's shit with big armies.
Yeah.
And you sort of redirect it by saying like, well, here's how you do it now. Like you can become extremely wealthy. Like with,
you know what? We should start a team called the Raiders.
The Marauders. That's right.
We'll plunder them in a different way.
What was it? The Vikings in Kells, in Secret of Kells? All they would say is gold. Gold. Remember that? That was a good movie. The Vikings were the Northmen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's about all I have to say about that topic. I've been thinking about that all week because of this stuff happening right now with this. Like, it's sort of fascinating me how people are feeling betrayed by these players doing this. That's what made me connect it to the whole city state deal, because it's like there's some kind of the whole endeavor of the sport is wrapped up with like patriotism and like, you know, with the country and stuff like that. So when these players start dissing the country, people are like, hey, like what the fuck, you know?
Yeah. Treason.
Well, it's just like, I don't know, maybe the connection is there because of all the patriotic stuff that happens at the beginning. Like every game, you know, they get somebody to do the anthem and they try to find the most badass person to sing it or whatever. And then everybody stands there and like they, you know, like that didn't always happen, but now it's like, and then they all have the jet flyovers and shit. Like there's all these symbols that happen at the beginning. And so when so it's like, it's kind of like, I imagine like in ancient Greece, you know, if they were having a parade, you know, this big sort of national parade or whatever, and like there were a couple of guys in the phalanx who like refused to pick up their shield and march with the phalanx because they were like, no, like I'm mad about like what Greece is doing right now. Like people would be like, fuck you, man. You know, it's like the same thing. It would not, whether the guy was right or not about what he was protesting. The reaction of the general point. Right, the reaction of the general populace is negative because they're like that guy is the champion of the city.
Yeah.
You know, and he's basically saying like fuck the city right now. You know, so his correctness or incorrectness on what he's doing is sort of immaterial to the public reaction to it and the place that he kind of holds in the psyche of the public.
Yeah.
That's what was fascinating about the whole thing. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I did not think about it that way. I was just like, I'm tired of hearing about football. Like, what the fuck?
And yeah, and football fans are like, I'm tired of hearing about politics.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm trying to listen to politics. Can we stop talking about football? I'm trying to watch football. Can we stop talking about politics? Yeah. Yep. Well, we've got 7 minutes left in this segment. What are we going to talk about?
I'm patriotic, but it has nothing to do with fucking sports. Like, I just don't give a fuck about that shit.
Right. I'm just saying, like, and I'd never understood it either.
I know, but I'm just analyzing myself right now. Like one of the other things I thought of was that I don't live in a city.
Yeah.
And I did for a year, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And I just like, I guess I like the feeling of like oneness, you know, like a patriotic feeling with the community around me or whatever. And the idea that the whole country is sort of
kind of like that. Yeah.
Kind of like that. But
we're all like, we may have differences of opinion, but we're all like, fuck yeah, America or whatever.
Yeah. But I don't want to be like around shitloads of fucking people all the time. You know, it's just like,
I love Americans, but I don't want to be around you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that there's, I guess when I see like people doing something badass, like with Hurricane Harvey and the whole relief effort, like that's cool as fuck.
Hell yeah.
That gives me the feeling like, hell yeah. Like we kick ass. You know, Texas.
Yeah. We got this. People were saying that should be Texas's motto. Like, we got this.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. But sports teams don't give me that feeling. I don't really care.
Yeah.
About that.
I do remember on 9/11 though that there was this incredible like when that happened for I don't know, maybe 2 weeks or so, there was this sort of national response that was palpable. Like everyone was like, what the fuck? Like, you know, everybody was sort of.
You remember the flags? Like everybody had flags
everywhere,
on their cars
like,
and everything. Just
like flags where you couldn't find any to buy. They were like, they had all been purchased. I remember them talking about that. And I just remember like there were all kinds of stuff that happened, but there was just this general national psyche of that where people were, despite what differences of politics, opinions, religion, whatever, it didn't matter. We were all just like, what the fuck, you know, like,
yeah.
And it was like, I
remember feeling that too.
Yeah. It was like for 2 weeks, we were all the same. We were a people that had just been attacked by whoever it was. Right. That was a fascinating, sensation because it was, you could feel it. It was very interesting.
And then something came along and confused our language, and we were once again divided and scattered throughout the country.
Babel happened. That's right. Yep. Talking pundits.
Yeah.
Flappy heads.
Yeah, that's interesting how certain things unite us, and then how other things just completely divide us. Yeah.
Something else flips out that we're united and like starts doing all this bullshit to stop it.
Yep.
Yeah. Fucking longheads. It's the fucking longheads. So, you've been going through the Feynman book again. Like, I mean, we could talk about this for a brief, like your updates on the physics stuff.
Yeah, I've been really thinking a lot about the idea of passing on knowledge to post-apocalyptic people generations later that would have no idea what that have no frame of reference to compare like what we have today.
Right.
So I started looking into just going back and refreshing on some physics to try to get ideas on how to say, like the main focus was like taking the laws of physics and converting them into a personified story with like gods and men and whatever.
Right, like the stories where you say like the information in the story is not for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the one idea I've had so far is I was thinking about conservation of energy, and I still have to work on this. Like, it's not right yet, but it was a pretty cool idea. The idea that energy is never lost. Okay, if you're not talking about entropy,
yeah,
but that the energy in something or energy somewhere can be converted into other types of energy.
Yeah, I think the conservation of matter and energy basically says that the matter and energy in the universe will always remain the same amount no matter what. Entropy just means that some of it's lost in the sense that it can't be recovered, but it's still there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's definitely there. So the idea I had was like you have this god, whatever his fucking name is, and he is immortal. And there's, whatever his storyline is, he's going along interacting with people, and then one day, like some human kills him with a sword, for example, was the idea that I had. Kills the god, and he's like, holy shit, and thought he was immortal, and everybody's like, ah. Well, the essence of the god, his entire being, like goes into the sword. Whatever it is that killed him, like he's converted into that thing.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly like the way energy is conserved, but if you have a bouncing ball and the ball is interacting with the floor that it's bouncing on, part of its energy, as the ball comes to a rest, a lot of its energy is converted into heat energy in the floor, or whatever. Okay, so that was kind of where the idea stemmed from. So the god becomes the sword. Like
the sword starts glowing or
just whatever. Yeah. Like the sword becomes incredibly powerful, has all the power of the god in it.
Yeah.
right? And the guy's just like, holy shit, the sword's fucking badass, you know?
It's talking to me.
And then something comes along and destroys the sword. So the basic idea was that whatever destroys it, it becomes. And it's a fairly simple way of conveying the idea of the conservation of energy. So like somebody melts the sword down to like make two different weapons with it or whatever.
Yeah.
And instead of the god's power going into the two weapons, the god's power goes into the fire that destroyed the sword.
Right.
And
Now he's in the forge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then somebody fucking douses the fire with water and the god becomes the water.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth.
And then he becomes the clouds, and then he rains back down on the earth, and like the rain builds the human form of him again, or something like that.
Yeah, so I was thinking of a way to where in the story he could become a man again, right?
Yeah.
Become a being,
Yeah.
right? Like a man. And so I don't know what the exact process would be, but it'd be cool to work on that story and try to create like the whole life of this god surrounding all of these other occurrences, and try to not only do that, but make the other occurrences in the story part of other physical interactions between things in their nature.
Yeah.
So it's
You could have it where he becomes the fire, and then he becomes the water, which then becomes rain, which then like becomes all these different plants, which feeds people, which become babies, and he becomes like everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Cyrus slivers.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about that, and I don't think it's something I'm going to figure out quickly.
Yeah.
It's something I'm going to be working on for a while. And anyway, I'm really into this project. So
Yeah.
any ideas anyone has about anything like that, that'd be,
I've been working, well, we need to take a break, but I have been working with Stellarium on the other idea of like trying to map places with the stars.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I found I can put myself in any place in the world in Stellarium, and then like put it to any time. I haven't figured out a way to like wrap that around a map so that I can see where stuff is.
Right.
I need somebody to make a mod. Like I want Stellarium to wrap itself around Google Earth.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I thought to do would be, say, of a place where there are, say, some Mayan structures or whatever. And you put yourself in that area, and then you rewind to, you have to pick some time that you want to go to or whatever, and see if there's, and you could be looking at an image of the place, and also looking at the image in the sky at the equinox or whatever.
Well, my idea was I was starting with one that's known, the Orion correlation in Egypt. So I align it to that, to roll it back 10,000 to 10,500 BC or whatever, to where everything's lined up in Egypt and on Giza.
Yeah.
And then I start going around the world looking at other places.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool. All right, well, let's take a break.
Yeah, let's take a break.
Come back and talk about some other shit.
That's right. Talk about
snake shit. Welcome back, folks. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, hailing to you from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science high atop the Edwards Plateau. We are just a rolling ball in space in the grand shooting gallery. And we're going to talk about less important things.
Yeah, so I got, I recently bought on Kindle, I bought Jim Vieira's book called Giants on Record.
Fuck yeah.
America's,
Let's talk about the Giants.
Yeah, America's Hidden, where is it? Where's the subtitle here? America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds and the Smithsonian Files. And I liked Vieira and his brother and Hugh Newman basically like all kind of collaborated on this book. And they're not the first ones. Like this, they're basically standing on the shoulders of giants, and no pun intended. Like there's been guys that have done a lot of work in this field before this, but they're the most recent ones, and they're kind of they've been using social media to sort of like that's how I first found out about Jim Vieira. Is like he was back when I was using Facebook as a means of communicating with other people interested in alternative archaeology and shit like that. That's how I met him. That I used to be on his feed where I would get like he would post
the Daily Giant.
The Daily Giant, yeah. Like he would post articles that he was like actual scans of newspaper articles, old ones that he would find. And then when we went to Vermont, I sent him a message like, "Hey, bro, like we're fucking up in the Northeast, like, you know, like is there any kind of old stone chambers or anything like that we can go look at?" And he was like, "Oh, I don't know anything about Vermont," but he poked around for me and he found a couple of places that he told us to go. He was like, "I heard there's a standing stone or something up there you guys could go look at." So we went.
He told us about Smith Farm.
Yeah, Smith Farm, and we actually found it was a kind of a roundabout way. Like we thought we were looking for. What did we think? We thought it was like a stone circle or maybe a monolith.
Well, there were two things. There was Smith Farm, and then there was another place that Uncle John told us about that wasn't Vieira.
That's right.
But Vieira sent us to Smith Farm, which actually
is an enormous place that is now split up into
like
a bunch
state. It's like state property or whatever.
Yeah, and
now it's
like pieces of it are state property, and there's a bunch of it that's private. But it's basically just an enormous. It used to be an enormous like homestead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we went there and fucking got our minds blown. But
yeah, it was very interesting. Like we were driving on the road where we knew it was called Smith Farm Road or something like that. It was basically like a road along the top of a ridge, and through deep forest. It was, and we were driving up and down. We were like, we don't really know where to go. It was just this long road, and there were kind of houses and stuff. And there was a guy outside mowing his lawn, so we stopped. And I walked up to him and was like, "Hey, man, so like, are there any giants out here or what? Mounds?" Like, we asked him about the mounds, the stone stuff in the woods, and he said it was interesting because we had been talking to him for a while at that point, but he gave this kind of sideways look, and he's like, "Well, yeah, people." He said something about how they're controversial.
Yeah.
You know, that was fascinating. We were like, "Oh yeah, we know."
He said one of the universities was coming out to do a study, another study on it because it was still inconclusive.
Yeah, that's right.
But they thought they were all like, the settlers, like
right.
These
colonists had done it.
The Smith farmers, right, had just piled up these stones.
Right, but he was basically kind of implying, I thought, that the people that lived in the area thought that was bullshit.
Oh, okay, well he's like, "You want to see one?" We're
he's like, "There's one right down here." We're like, "Fuck yeah!"
It's like one in my backyard.
Yeah,
and it was small. We went down there, but it was like nice and round and pretty tall. I think it was like 4 or 5 feet tall.
Yeah, and there was
8 foot diameter maybe.
It was basically comprised of granite, like roundish granite. You know, just stones. They were all stacked up or whatever, and they weren't
shaped stones. They were just piled, but they were piled in a very orderly fashion where it was like, fairly smooth on the outside.
Yeah, that's right. And he basically was like, "So if you're looking for these, just drive up and down there. They're all in the woods."
Yeah,
and
they're everywhere.
We're like, okay. So we get back in the car, and we're kind of driving, and like we're looking really. The woods are like in this area, like you're in the road, and there's kind of a lane above you where the canopy is broken because of the road. So there's sunshine coming through, but when you look into the woods, it gets dark. It's dark in there.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of like having to peer, and like suddenly we begin to see that there's like these enormous rounded shadow forms.
Like the one he showed us was tiny.
Yeah.
And we started seeing like, holy shit.
We're like, dude, I think
like pull over.
Let's pull over right now.
Uncle
Fucking
John
now.
just like pulls over. We get out and
they were like literally. We walked down to the woods, and once your eyes adjusted to the gloom, they were everywhere. They were enormous. Like some of them were really huge. Like where you're looking at a side of it, and you're like, you think, okay, this is kind of the size of a house. But then you sort of walk around one side and you see that it goes a long way on this side. Yeah. And then it's so.
And they were just randomly like so.
And in the middle of the woods.
They're saying the farmers piled them up because they needed to plow. But we're on the side of a mountain.
Yeah.
And there's massive boulders and everything everywhere.
Yeah.
And one of the piles I remember was piled up against the side of this huge freaking boulder that must have been 20 or 30
That's right.
feet
It was this
tall,
enormous
like
megalith.
sheer cliff that's sticking out of the side of the mountain. And this pile of rocks is just all the way up on the side of this thing on one side, and it's freaking incredible. And then there were some that were like walls almost, 8 feet tall, 3 or 4 feet wide,
and just like would meander
run
through
the woods and curve and turn and just like, what the hell?
And also the the place where we were staying at the time, we had this, like, we were up there for a wedding, and so
holy shit, Brett. Okay, it's
Rochester, Vermont. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's in Rochester. The 200-acre Smith Farm homestead is now part of the Green Mountain National Forest. It is at an elevation of 1,900 feet on the slopes of Mount Horrid.
Mount Horrid. How was it up there? It was horrible.
Yeah. How's the farming up there? Horrible.
It's horrid.
It's horrid. You can't plow anything with all those rocks.
Yeah, it's either horrid like take, or you hoard everything. But we for the wedding, we had a cabin that also faced a national park. I can't remember exactly where it was. It wasn't the Green Mountain National Forest.
It's really not part. It was just national forests or whatever. It was like they weren't really like,
yeah, it wasn't a park.
Parks, but
it was part of the NPS, like the National Park System. Or maybe it was state owned. I don't know. Yeah. But we basically had this beautiful cabin that faced, like, the whole backyard was basically faced this public land that was just deep woods. You know, it was, and the very first day, Kyle and I went out into those woods to sort of look around, and we found meandering walls just going everywhere through the woods there, like. And it was interesting because some of the construction of that wall was very strange. The way it would go in certain places, it would be like sort of things would be standing up, and there would be little lintels over top of them and stuff. Like it would make the wall hollow. And then other places it would be just sort of more stacked rocks. And then at certain corners, there would be these enormous white rocks. So most of the rocks were dark. They were like a dark black or whatever. They were granite. But then at some corners, there would be these enormous white ones that turned out to be like almost solid quartz. And they just went meandering all through the forest. It was very strange, very interesting. And so the reason I'm talking about that is because these mounds of stones that we were finding in Vermont look a lot like some of the mounds that are described in Vieira's book, and this other one, I bought another one called the...
Yeah, Brett says there's 150 documented stone mounds over an area of 60 acres at Smith Farm.
150. I wonder... Yeah. The thing is that in this book, people are dismantling those mounds. Like, so basically Jim Vieira is finding all these old records, okay? Because during from about 1800 all the way up to the 1950s and even up to the 1970s, these mounds were just, they were everywhere in America, but the heaviest concentration was Ohio, New York, and in the Mississippi Valley. But they were talking about some farms that had like 20 or 30 of them on it, you know?
Yeah.
And people would like, the farmers would plow them or whatever, a lot of them weren't stone, they were just sort of earthen. And so they would be this weird conical kind of earthen hill, and they would eventually just start running their plow over it, and it would slowly smooth it out into the field. But as they would do that each year, stuff would kind of turn up.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes things would turn up that were really fascinating, and so they would stop the plowing and just start digging. So that's the majority of the cases are like that. Some, ex-farmer was plowing his field over one of the old mounds or whatever, and like it had been known that was a place of ancient habitation because that whole area has fragments of pottery and like arrowheads and everything. But as he was running his plow this time, it scraped along a stone slab down into the ground, about a foot deep or whatever. So he stops the plowing and he like kind of uncovers this enormous limestone slab, which when they pry it up turns out to be like the top of an enormous sarcophagus holding like an 8-foot freaking skeleton, right?
Yeah, freaking badass.
Yeah, and the skeletons were not all the giant skeletons were not all the same. Like some of them talk about they have double dentition, so like double rows of teeth all the way around. So like you imagine like you have your normal row of teeth, and then right behind them in your jawline is another...
Are your baby teeth that never fell out.
Yeah, just another set completely all the way around that and there's no dental problems. Like a lot of the reports like sort of comment...
Perfect sets of teeth.
Yeah, comment on how the teeth are perfect. Like even if all the other bones are falling apart, the teeth themselves are like pristine. There's no sign of cavities or anything like that. Some of them even said that they had molars all the way across. Like there was no whatever they call these bicuspids, the ones in the front that cut. We have the 4 of those, and then there's the 2 canines, and then the molars start. They were saying that on some of these giant skeletons, it was just all molars. They were the enormous, fat, flat teeth from front to back on top and bottom. 2 sets of them. That must have been a weird looking mouth when they opened it.
Yeah.
It's just like this
whale mouth.
Right. And some of them, there was at least one documented point where they were all sharp. In other words, like every single tooth, the guy was saying that every single tooth in the mouth in all these, in all the skeletons they found in this one burial place were pointed like a predator's teeth. And then there were double rows of that. So it's like, that looked like a shark mouth. You open it up, there's just like all these teeth in there that are razor sharp.
Oh, that's crazy.
But some of them would say that the like forehead would begin sloping back just above the eyebrows.
Yeah.
Right. Which they would usually call that like prehistoric or archaic or whatever, some kind of archaic version. But sometimes they had enormously high brows. So like they were long heads, basically, that they would have these long rounded heads. They always talked about how like the jawbones, they find the biggest dude there with the biggest beard, and they could take the jawbone and like put it over the outside of their beard with enough room for their fingers and hands to go inside there. Or they talk about how like the biggest skull that they found in the place was the size of a bucket, like a good, like a 5-gallon bucket. It's like this enormous skull. They'd say a bucket or a basket, that if it was open on the bottom, people could wear it like a helmet. Like you just put your entire head inside of the cranial cavity of this skull. So there was a lot of reports of 7 foot to 8 foot or whatever, but there were plenty that were like 9, 10, and there were a couple that were like 12 to 14.
Yeah.
Okay. And I suspect by the way the reports read that the reason there aren't as many 12 to 14s is because people were hesitant to say that. Like you find a 7-foot skeleton, you're like, well, he's 7 foot man. He's like, well, there are 7 foot people. They're rare, but there are. 8 feet is kind of getting up there. 9 to 10 feet is like, there's no known normal human that's 9 to 10 feet tall. But once you get to 12 to 14, people are like, whatever, dude, like bullshit. Yeah. So they will say things like, you begin to see across the reports that they'll say like, there's an 8 foot, and there's this guy may have been 9 to 10 feet, or they'll say, and then there were some skeletons that may have been larger. Yeah. Right. Or they'll say anywhere from they were from 9 feet up. Which is like, okay, up, like what? How far up is up? Also, the burial attitudes, like almost invariably they were buried sitting up. So there were some that were buried standing, which is just strange. Yeah, that's crazy. Like how do you got a 10-foot dude and you're like, man, we have to bury him standing up. Shit. you gotta dig like a 16-foot shaft so that because he's 10 feet tall, you want him 6 feet down. But that may be part of the reason why they put so many stones over it. So it's like they didn't dig the graves as deep, so they would like put these enormous mounds over top of them to keep them from being predated or whatever. But sometimes the mounds were actually structures. So it would look like this earthen cone, but when they would start to get the earth off there, they would discover that there's an actual stone structure or even baked clay. It was very interesting how they would talk about some yellow clay that was, they were like, well, this yellow clay, it's not from the area. And I don't think anybody ever pinpointed where it was from, but there was yellow clay in these mounds a lot. And they would basically build this weird yellow clay thing, and then they would burn a fire. And they said they found hints of charcoal and ash around the whole thing that had hardened the clay.
So they fired it. They built a structure out of clay and then fired it.
Right, and then they basically like built a huge fire in it, and then they would, eventually they would put bodies in there. Like it's not clear that these structures were intended to be tombs at first, that they seem to have some other purposes, and then eventually were used as funerary things. And sometimes it's as simple as like there's a mound that was basically multiple layers of multiple generations of normal Native American burials, right? So like starting from the top, they would start digging down and they would find a layer of people and their heads were either all facing inwards or all their feet were facing east or whatever, you know. But then they would dig past that layer and there's another older layer of more bodies, and they go down more and like they continue to find these layers of burials basically that were all essentially above ground. But when they get all the way to the ground level, they see that the soil is still disturbed. So they dig below ground level and then they find like a single enormous giant skeleton inside of a stone box. Like the Native Americans had been burying themselves atop this single grave for thousands of years.
That's wild. Are there any dates like what time periods they think these things were buried?
Well, almost all of these discoveries were made before any kind of dating.
Yeah.
You know, so they would say that they would sort of tell you that the age was very great because of the way things reacted when they dug them up, right? Because quite often they would say that, you know, the skeletons were like completely intact, but upon exposure to the air, they crumbled to dust.
Yeah.
Or like they were fine, they were very brittle and very, you know, very like fragile, but they were able to extract them or whatever. But over time they just disappeared, even, you know, or and left nothing but the teeth. Or they would say that they had an enormous quantity of bones because they were digging up this whole thing. A lot of times it looks like a free-for-all. Like, in other words, the farmer discovers it, and he kind of tells his wife, he's like, Mabel, look at these giant, you know, and she goes and starts gossiping, and then the whole town shows up, and everybody kind of makes off with bones until they're all gone.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, like, Smithsonian people show up. Sometimes it is Smithsonian guys doing the digging. And sometimes it's, like, people that are claiming for the be of the Smithsonian, but I'm like, those are men in black. Like, they got there too fast, and they're too weird. They're like, we are from the Smithsonian. But really he does Jim Vieira does like sort of narrows down the whole Smithsonian problem to this one guy, this one director. I can't really pronounce his name, it's very strange, but he basically starts this campaign of denying any kind of other race of people that were previous to the Native Americans that we had encountered, like the settlers had encountered. In other words, his idea was like, they showed up about 2,000 years ago. Okay, like he's first started this whole thing where like Americas were populated very recently, and before that, no one was here. Okay, that has continued to this day. Like the date keeps getting pushed back, but they still fight for every fucking inch.
Yeah,
you know, like the whole like Clovis barrier wall, where like anybody who started to try to talk about like something older than Clovis was just completely, you know, discredited and like thrown out of the scientific community. Like that's crumbled at this point, but it lasted for almost 100 years, you know, that like the Clovis people were the very first.
Yeah.
And no one was before them. That's a continuation of this guy. His name is like Aldous, I can't pronounce his last name, Herlica, something like that. But he basically was appointed as the head of the Smithsonian. He immediately started this campaign of like 2,000 years ago, the ancestors of the natives that we know showed up here, and there was nothing before that. And he fought for that for a long time. Eventually, the Folsom discovery was made, the Folsom culture, which is after Clovis, but probably, you know, like 7,000 or 8,000 years old.
Right.
And he like tried to get that stomped down, but it didn't work. There was just too much evidence. And then eventually the Clovis was found. But anyway, that whole thing was started by him, and he tried to just deny the existence of any kind of, you know, archaic, non-Indian race. Like people all over the United States seem to have this opinion of this like prehistoric race of what they call the mound builder culture.
Right.
That they considered to be distinct from the native culture that was there now, because a lot of times the natives told them it was. That like we didn't build those mounds, our fathers didn't build those mounds, like our forefathers didn't build those mounds. They were here when we got here. You know?
Yeah.
But the natives did have a lot of stories about their ancestors encountering giants.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were friendly and badass. Sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were cannibals. Sometimes there were enormous wars. And then like the colonists would find evidence. So like there would be these newspaper articles where somebody was saying like, so this guy was like going down the river in his, you know, in his boat, and he runs aground on this little island that's right beneath these falls, and it's on the Ohio River or whatever. And like while he was making repairs to his boat, he discovered that like the island seemed to be made up of bones of people.
Holy shit.
And he just, he's like looking around. He's like, holy shit, there's like thousands of human bones here. And then he starts to notice that there's broken spear points and all this shit, right? That, like the entire island is made of this. And then he notices that some of the supposedly human bones are like enormous, right? That like he finds a femur. Usually there's like a femur, like where he holds the femur up to his own hip and it extends halfway down his calf. So that, like basically the person's thigh bone is like, half again as long as his.
Yeah.
And then the newspaper article would say this corroborates the story that the local tribe has of this ancient legend of their ancestors fighting this enormous battle with these giants, and that they trapped them on an island below the falls there and killed every single last one of them. Right. It's like a lot of articles were like that, where the people writing the stories are like, wow, look at this. Like, we found physical evidence that like completely corroborates this supposedly mythical legend, that the local Indians have had of like fighting off these giants and killing them all. So, well, this guy lands on this island and discovers like it's covered in bones that are human, but they're enormous, right? There was a lot of that kind of stuff. He talks about where like they spend some time wondering where they came from, right? He's like, so like did they show up here from somewhere else?
Did they come across the ice bridge?
Yeah. Did they come across the Bering Strait? Bearings have to be round. That's all I got to say. But he talks about there's like the California, the Catalina Islands, something like that. There's basically off the coast of California, there's a bunch of islands, okay, in the Pacific. And on some of them, there have been some very strange finds that had to do with giants. And it basically looks like there was an enormous population of giants on one of these islands. Their bodies were found in caves. They were mummified, buried up in the stones in the mountains. And they also identify the fact that there were basically two distinct types of giants. There was black-headed ones and red-headed ones. Both of them grew like enormous beards. Both of them were white-skinned. Okay, they were the Indians called them pale faces, right, or white people, and this was kind of confusing to the Indians at first because like white people start showing up, they're like, wait, they're short, but they have beards, but they're short, and they're dumb. But because a lot of times they had great respect, even if they had fought to the death with the giant race, they had great respect for their command of the forces of nature. And there was one really fascinating part in there where like there was a guy that had kind of like, there was a doctor, an anthropologist, or like what you would consider to be an early anthropologist. This was before they had something called anthropology, but that's basically what he was doing. So he had spent a lot of time around this Indian tribe to the point to where they trusted him. He had shown himself to be a trustworthy, so they would tell him stuff, right? And so they were basically, him and the chief of this tribe were exploring these caves together in these mountains that had all these burials of mummified giant skeletons and other things, that indicate high technology. And at one point he asked the chief, he's like, well, like, you saw them doing these things. Why did you not, like, how come you didn't try to learn from them because the chief would talk about how difficult some of the battles were because these guys had commands of forces of nature. Whereas the Indians we had arrows and, we were just like, fuck, but they fought them off anyway. So he was asking them, like, why didn't you, like, spy on them, like, figure out the technology, steal it or whatever? And the Indian told him, he was like, we did have that command of nature at some point, or like our forefathers did. It was given to us in the form of a book by the Great Spirit. But eventually we lost the book. And from then on, we have never had that command. Like, I was like, okay, what is that? What is he saying? There's symbols in there that, like he obviously isn't talking about like God sticking his hand down out of the clouds and be like, here's a book of all the knowledge of the universe. Like, there's something there though that he's talking about. Like, there was a book, some sort of repository, right? But then they lost it, and they never tried to regain it. there was something about losing the book meant that you weren't like, if by being given the book by the Great Spirit meant it was okay for you to do these things that were in the book.
Or maybe they had writing and then they lost writing because they didn't have writing when we got here.
Right.
Well, I say we, but when the Europeans got here.
Another fascinating historical aspect of this, and like this can be confirmed, unlike a lot of the people think that the giants can't be confirmed because it's just newspaper stories. But there was an Indian chief, and he was enormous. Okay, so like first of all, you have to understand that like when colonists started coming here, there were still giants here. Often the chief of the tribe would just be like 8 feet fucking tall and just badass, right? That was pretty commonplace back then. So Jim Vieira goes through a lot of those accounts where like he's like, so the giants were actually physically present at the time of the colonizations, like all the way up until the late 1800s. There were still enormous natives, and people would comment on like not only were they enormous, but they were like Greek gods. They were physically perfect. You know, that in the newspaper articles, they would talk about how the guy could pose as a model for any one of Michelangelo. You know, like they just were pristine physically. Like not only was he 7.5 feet tall, he fucking looked like, you know, Achilles or whatever. He just like looked like a Greek god. That they were physically perfect. Like, and they would talk about how 6 feet across at the shoulders. Like, think about that.
That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, just like.
Holy shit. Put that guy on your football team.
That's right. Yeah.
Hey, we're getting up on time. I forgot to start the
clock. I was like, man, we got a lot of time here. 0 seconds.
0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Yeah, this is badass. I want to talk about this some more.
Yep.
After this snake break.
Snake break for some snake snacks. I won.